Let us all welcome Angela. What nationality am I?
Fellow Toastmasters and distinguished guests, there's a number of faces here today that I've not seen before. What is it that you answer when somebody asks you, what nationality are you? Do you base it on the country you live in? Do you base it on your passport? Do you base it on your ancestry or your ethnicity? This has provided a dilemma for me and, as you mentioned, confusion over the years. Let me explain to you why. In order to do so, I've got to take you back to 1960. My mother, not in 1960, my mother was born in Harrogate, England. My father was born in Exarchos, a small village in central Greece. Some of you, through your travels, may be familiar with the archaeological site of Delphi. Exarchos is situated near Delphi. 1960, Melbourne. My mother, by day, is a dressmaker, specialising in bridal wear. By night, she's a nightclub singer, specialising in Doris Day cover songs. In fact, her nickname was Doris. That was due to her resemblance, physically and vocally, to this very popular singer of the day. My father was a wrestler. Some of you may have seen him wrestle in the 1970s in the Horton Pavilion or on Saturday mornings, World Champion, Channel 9's World Championship of Wrestling. This was in the Killer Kowalski, Mario Milano days. So, the nightclub singer and the wrestler fall in love, much to the horror of my father's strict Greek parents. You see, not only was it my grandparents' vision for my father to marry a Greek, he was to marry a Greek of their choosing. So, a red-haired nightclub singer who didn't live at home was simply not going to do. So my parents had a choice to make. My mother, should she marry into a family that clearly did not want her? My father, should he cause controversy by marrying my mother and make my grandparents lose face in the Greek community? Obviously, they married. Not only did they marry, they eloped to Brisbane in order for it to happen. Shortly after, my grandfather arrived on their doorstep unannounced. How he obtained their address, nobody was quite sure of. He asked them to return to Melbourne. He assured them that all was forgiven and that they would be welcomed both with open arms. The reality of the matter was that my grandfather was most concerned that the family business, being a milk bar, pool hall, dance hall in Carlton, Melbourne, would suffer because my father, being a wrestler, was the main attraction. So, back to Melbourne they moved. But unfortunately, despite my grandfather's assurances, things were difficult for my mother, adjusting to the Greek way. 9 months later, or 10, I arrived. I was born. And it made things even more difficult for my mother because of the Greek traditions that she was being asked to adhere to, such as after the birth of a child, you don't leave the house for 40 days. So, it was to my mother's great relief when my father suggested that they move to London so that he could further his career in Europe, where wrestling was as big a sport as boxing, as popular a sport. So off to London they went, but it wasn't too long before the sunny, blue skies of Spain beckoned my father. So next we moved to Valencia and Madrid. And my father added to his repertoire by becoming a stuntman and a movie extra in movies such as El Cid with Sophia Loren and Charlton Heston, in which one scene they used 600 extras, and The Big White Hope, a movie about boxing. Then, for some reason that I can't remember, we moved back to London and my brother Jimmy was born. But before too long, it was back to Spain. And this time we settled in Barcelona. And on one occasion, my father wrestled in an exhibition match that was held before a bullfight in the famous Plaza de Toros in Barcelona. Some of you may be familiar with it, and some of you may also know that bullfighting is now banned. My father obviously couldn't settle in one place for very long. So it was Germany next. West Berlin. We're talking 1970, the wall was still up. There was that division between East Berlin, West Berlin, and West Berlin was divided up into 4 sectors: American, English, French, and one that escapes me. Anyway, we settled in the British sector. I was very upset at having left all my friends back in Spain. But my mother assured me that once I started primary school around the corner from the house, that I would make friends. So unbeknownst to my mother, I snuck out and went around the corner. I was young, naive, and hopeful. I stood outside the primary school gates, waiting for school to break up, expecting kids to just come up to me and want to be my friend. Well, you can imagine my mother's amazement, who didn't even know I'd snuck out, when I came back home through the front door, crying, distraught, because none of the kids had come up to me and asked me to be their friends. Anyway, naturally, as soon as I did start at the school, I did make friends, but it was difficult, because here I was, a non-German speaking person, could only speak Spanish, Greek surname, born in Australia. I was the only one in the school with those characteristics. My father used that base to go on many tours. He would go on tour for many months to places, exotic places such as Japan, and quite often to Beirut, now known as Lebanon. So, imagine my mother's dismay when my father suggested Africa. That was the last straw. She said no. She reminded him of his promise that he had made years earlier, that once I reached high school, once I became of the age to start high school, that we would relocate back to Australia to where her family lived, in Sydney. By this time, most of our Greek relatives from Melbourne had relocated back to Greece. So it's to Sydney, Australia that we moved, first to Berala, then to Macquarie Fields. So I thought I would finally fit in. I was back home. But I had this Greek surname. I couldn't speak English, but I was born in Australia. So once again, I found myself in strange surroundings. And I must admit, it wasn't until I left school, got a job, moved to Brighton Les Sands, made friends with the Greek social groups that I truly felt at home. So, you can understand my dilemma when someone asks me this question, what is my nationality? Do I base it on my ancestry, my ethnicity, my passport, the country that I reside in? Well, ultimately, my opinion is I'm Australian and I'm proud to be Australian, and that is my nationality. And did I mention that my grandfather was born in Turkey and I have 2 foster brothers that are from Timor? But that's a story for another time. So I thank you for your patience and for listening, and thank you again.
It's a difficult thing to be coming up front, especially in the first speech, and I would like to congratulate Angela for her icebreaker speech today.
Are you now going to take it away because I went over by 4 minutes?